There are words in our vocabulary that we repeat so often that they lose their meaning. Sometimes they become just cliché. Sometimes they simply lose their meaning and they sound like gibberish in our ears. I wonder sometimes if the word community is like that. Has it become cliché? So to the point that we don't even know what it means, or we don't even know why it matters. Now, I'm not going to assume that that has happened here, but as soon as I ask those questions, maybe I am assuming that that has happened here. I don't know. But I do think it's not a bad idea. It is a good idea to revisit some of our foundational words and ideas and thoughts and concepts. I Googled the definition of community, and Google thinks it means two things. I've messed with the words just a little bit, but Google says a group of people living in the same place. So we have the community of Mimico, or having a particular characteristic in common, like the scientific community. Or community can mean a feeling of fellowship or camaraderie when we are amongst people with common attitudes, interests, and goals. The sense of community that gathering with other Christians can provide, by example. So it's a description of location or of affinity, or it is a description of our feeling of community, fellowship, camaraderie. Another word I don't say very often. And I guess our vision statement suggests both. We are a community in Mimico of Christ, our affinity, our common ground. But this morning I want to suggest that community needs to be more than a description of our community, of our geography, or even a description of our feelings and attitudes. Community needs to be a verb. Community is something we do, even more perhaps than something we are. We can discuss that a little bit later on, but certainly I want to suggest this morning that community is a verb. As we continue to evaluate our present state as a church community, it is good for us to start at this as a descriptor. Let me pray. Father in heaven, you have called us to community. We have sung about it. We have heard about it. This is what we say we are. This is who we say we are. And so I invite you again to be our community, to give us the ears to hear what you have to say about the community that you have called us to be. Amen. I'm a student of culture. I have taken some formal training in cross-cultural engagement. And the theory or the generally accepted discussion of culture includes characteristics, one of which is your culture generally a communal or collectivistic culture, or is your culture an individualistic culture? Am I more concerned with individual, in other words, my rights, or am I concerned with the community around us, the group's goals, the group's values, the group's relationships? See, cultural students and cultural teachers suggest that this is simply a preference. This is the way we do things around here. But let me suggest in the Christian context, and we are in a Christian context, that community is far more significant and far more important than just the way we do things, just our attitudes. Christianity is community. It is communal. It is communion. Let's start at the very beginning. You missed your cue, Jan. Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. I knew she'd know it. I didn't warn her about that was coming. But don't start singing, please. Don't start, yeah. Let's start at the very beginning. Oops, I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. Genesis chapter 1. And I so often am astounded how much of our theology needs to begin in Genesis. We need to understand who God is. We go back to Genesis. In the story, in the accounts of creation, what did he say? Verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so they may rule over the flesh of the sea, the birds of the sky, over the livestock, over all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground." Now, the stewardship of nature and creation is a whole different conversation, a significant conversation today. But I want to start at the beginning. Let us make mankind in our image. The plural sense of God is significant, important, and intentional. God is community. The essence of God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit together as one, a community of Godness, as I would describe it. As we recall the story of creation, the accounts of creation, after the days of creation, they said, "It is good, it is good, it is good." So then we read what some scientists or Bible scholars say, the second account of creation, and there's some interesting differences between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But in the creation of humanity, he started with Adam. Adam simply means man or mankind. And God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Creation is good, but what's not good? Being alone. If you read the story of creation, after God created male and female, man and woman, creation moves from good to very good. Community, man and woman, was established. This completed, may I suggest, the image of God. Man, male alone, doesn't represent the full or the full image of God. Man and women, male and female, together in union, in vulnerability and transparency, is Godness, is community, is the very root of it. Community is therefore the foundational concept, the foundational characteristic of our created beings. Genesis chapter 3, along comes the fall, and what's the first thing to happen is separation. Separation from God and his creation, separation from man and woman. We used the word at least twice today that God frees us from our shame, a huge concept. What happens in Genesis 3 is shame is introduced, and that separates people from each other. We long for, do we not, a return to Eden, a return to that sense of community. What's the foundational longing of our hearts? Is to love and be loved, to serve and to be served, to know and to be known. This is who we are, a community of Christ. This is who we long to be. Culturally speaking, the world of the Bible is a world of communalism. It is a collectivistic world. It is a world that is far more concerned with family, with lineage, with tribe, and the common good of these communities than it is of individualism. Increasingly so, mostly in the Western world in the 21st century, it is this rise of what I would call almost a radical individualism. My rights above all else. Paraphrasing a writer who I read this week, but he talks about the loss of sense of community. The loss of this idea that we are here together, in this together, has resulted in our culture has disintegrated into warring self-interest groups out for their own interest at the expense of all others. I've heard this period of culture or society being called the age of divisiveness. We are divided like no before. I think that's not quite accurate. This is the age of hate. If you act or think or behave differently than I think you should, I have a right to hate you. This is an age of us and them. Whoever the us is, whoever the them is, this is the age of us and them. This is the age of the right and the left. And no longer is this sort of a safe political description. It is warring sides. In a different context, Jesus says to his disciples, "Not so with you." In a different context, Paul says to his readers, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world." At its root, the Christian faith is a faith of reunity, reconciliation of that which was broken or estranged or separated or bound or enslaved. What was the last word we sung? We have freedom in resurrection power. We are reconciled first with God through salvation bought by Jesus on the cross. We have the means and the power to be reconciled with God, and we are reconciled with each other, and we are even reconciled with the creation around us. The platform, I have lost track of this silly thing. The platform around us has changed for our holiday club. And I stole this from the bulletin board because I am incredibly excited and impressed by the leadership, the young people who we have leading the holiday club. It's called Passport for Peacemakers. That's the theme of the holiday club. And I don't know the content of it, but it says, join us as we travel the world to create peace and inspire others to follow as a peacemaker. Not a peacekeeper, that's different. Agents of reconciliation, that's what we're going to be teaching our kids. They are going to look at the world through the eyes of peacemakers. So what is the church's attitude, point of view? How are we not conformed to the pattern of this world? Let me read a paragraph from Parker Palmer's, and the book is called The Company of Strangers, an incredible little book. Yeah, I have a longer quote than this one, but let me read this paragraph. The church's understanding of human unity is different and deeper than the political theories which have shaped our conventional thinking. For the Christian, our unity is known not in politics and power, but in prayer, and is given by the grace which answers prayer. Our unity, in other words, our community, is sought by the church. The unity the church sees. The unity sought by the church is not achieved through calculation and manipulation, but through contemplation, vulnerability, and self-giving. Jesus says, not so with you. Paul says, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. See, there's a paradox in today's society. In the words of Carey Nieuwhof, we have never been more connected. If I asked you to hold up your cell phones, I'm sure that 80% of us would hold up that device that can connect us immediately to our friends back in China or up north. We have never been more connected, but we have never felt more alone. We need to act in community, to live in community. And I want just to very quickly, without comment, read some of the words from both Paul and Jesus about what they think community should be. Now, I had the children do this, and you couldn't hear it, and that's fine. It's good to have them involved. Paul, in his letters, uses the word, it's a singular word, but uses the word one another 40 times in his writings. 40 times in those letters, Paul talks about one another. And it starts with Jesus. Love one another. And Paul, be devoted to one another. Honor one another above yourselves. Live in harmony with one another. Accept one another. Instruct one another. Care, have concern for one another. Serve one another. Bear one another's burdens. Forgive one another. Be patient with one another. Be kind and compassionate to one another. Submit to one another. Consider others better than yourselves. Look to the interests of one another. Bear with one another. Teach one another. Build up one another. Encourage one another. Stir up one another to love and good works. Show hospitality to one another. Employ the gifts that God has given us for the benefit of one another. And every time that Paul uses the one another word, there is a verb. And it was the verbs that I hoped you heard. The verb of love, the verb of patience, or of forgiveness, the verb of living in harmony, of hospitality. I think the hospitality has been lost in this individualistic 21st century society, and something I long for to be recovered. Stir one another on. Paul uses the word, or one of the translations says, spur one another on. And if you think of a horse and the spurs, I don't want to be spurred, and I don't want you to spur me, thank you very much. But I do want you to encourage me to love and good works. So what's my point this morning? Maybe simply that community is a verb. Community is something we do more than a descriptor of us. It should describe, let it describe how we live together, how we share life together. Church leaders talk about doing church, and I don't really like that language. I am much more happy with this idea of sharing life together, the good and the bad, the hard times and the good times. We celebrated the past and we evaluate the present. The present is both good and difficult, and we must embrace and share that together. In the bulletin, the key verse for the morning is John chapter 13, 34 and 35, and it's taken me all morning to get there. But let me suggest that herein is our foundation, and I'm going to read it. Let me just find it and open it. John 13, 34, 35. If you know the context of John 13, in its context is so important. John chapter 13 to 16 is being called the upper room discourse. Jesus and his disciples, and it's his final teaching to them. Powerful, powerful chapters. The beginning of John 13, Jesus washes their disciples' feet. Something in cultural context the servant should have done. The master, the rabbi, the teacher did it. Peter objected, and others were very uncomfortable. But Jesus says, I am doing this to show you the extent of my power. He is so powerful, he will wash the feet. Then Jesus predicts that he will be betrayed. And then Jesus predicts that Peter will deny him. Somewhere towards the end of this very powerful emotional moment, Jesus says, a new command I give to you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. An imperative, a command, something that we must do. I missed that part of it. Forgive me. I think it's important. By this will everyone know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, what is our vision statement? A community of Christ, sharing Christ with our communities. That's built into this, is it not? Everyone, our communities will know that we are disciples of Christ if we love one another. If we are divided, that's what the world will see. If we are somehow united in love, that's what the world sees, can see, should see. So what? We must live in love. We must live in one anothering with grace, with vulnerability, with discipleship, with encouragement. But the most important, Paul says, is agape, is love. Love that seeks the benefit of the other person. That's how we are to live. That's how we are to act. That's how we are to relate together one another, how we grow together one another, how we will impact our communities for Christ if we are living in community, and how the Bible describes community, one anothering each other. Next week, a week from now, I will be sitting in the bush up near Parry Sound, hopefully eating some bass fillets with my best friends from Guelph. We're doing a 4-day canoe trip. And Alvin will continue looking at our vision statements. How do we see our neighbor? Who is our neighbor? Who do we see when we see them? How can we impact our community?